Boss fired me right after I landed the biggest contract in company's history. They had no idea what was coming next. It wasn't supposed to be this way. The day started like any other, with the hum of fluorescent lights buzzing overhead and the faint aroma of stale coffee lingering in the air. My desk sat tucked into a corner of the open-plan office, surrounded by rows of cubicles that seemed to stretch endlessly, each one housing someone chasing their own version of success. Today was different though. Today, I carried something monumental, the largest contract our company had ever seen. The meeting room felt electric as I walked in, clutching my tablet tightly against my chest. The presentation had gone perfectly, or so I thought. Every slide hit its mark, every statistic sang its tune, and every pause for effect landed exactly where it needed to. When the client finally said yes, shaking hands across the polished mahogany table, I could feel my heart swelling with pride. This wasn't just a win for me, it was a win for everyone who'd worked tirelessly alongside me, pouring hours, sweat, and sleepless nights into making this deal happen. But then came the call from HR later that afternoon. A curt summons to the conference room on the executive floor, a space reserved only for high-stakes decisions or ceremonial announcements. My stomach churned as I made my way up there, heels clicking against the marble floors. Something about the tone of the email, the lack of detail, set off alarm bells in my head. Still, nothing could have prepared me for what happened next. Sitting at the far end of the long glass table was Mr. Caldwell, our CEO, flanked by two members of senior management whose names I barely remembered. Their faces were unreadable masks, professional but distant. Before I even had a chance to sit down, Caldwell spoke. "We appreciate your efforts," he began, his voice clipped and formal, "but after careful consideration, we've decided to part ways." My jaw dropped. Part ways? What did that even mean? "You're firing me?" I asked, incredulous. "After today?" He nodded stiffly, avoiding eye contact. "It's not personal. It's business." Business. That word hung in the air between us, cold and hollow. Business didn't care that I'd spent 3 years building relationships with clients, working late nights when others clocked out early, sacrificing weekends and holidays to ensure everything ran smoothly. Business didn't care that I'd just secured a deal worth millions, a deal that would put our company on the map forever. As I stumbled out of the building an hour later, clutching a cardboard box filled with my belongings, I couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal. How could they do this? To me? To the team? To themselves? But more than anger, there was confusion. Why now? Why like this? Walking home through the crisp autumn air, I replayed the events of the past few weeks in my mind, searching for clues. Had I missed something? Overstepped somehow? No matter how hard I tried, nothing added up. If anything, I'd been more cautious than usual, aware of the precarious nature of corporate politics. Yet here I was, jobless and blindsided. That night, lying awake in bed staring at the ceiling, I realized something unsettling. They thought they'd won. They thought they'd gotten rid of me before I became too much of a threat. What they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly know, was that the contract I'd landed wasn't just a victory for the company. It was also a door opening to opportunities one hadn't fully grasped yet. Over the next few days, I allowed myself to wallow briefly in self-pity. Friends brought over wine and pizza, offering sympathetic ears and outraged exclamations. Family called, urging me to take legal action or demand answers. But deep down, I knew none of that mattered anymore. Revenge wasn't going to fix this. Neither was bitterness. Instead, I found myself drawn to a quiet determination bubbling beneath the surface, a resolve to turn this catastrophic twist of fate into something extraordinary. It started with a phone call. One of the key stakeholders from the newly signed contract reached out personally to congratulate me. His name was Marcus Langley, and he ran one of the largest venture capital firms in the country. During negotiations, we developed a rapport, exchanging ideas beyond the scope of the deal itself. He admired my tenacity, my ability to think outside the box. And now, hearing about my abrupt departure, he sounded genuinely shocked. "They let you go?" he asked, disbelief evident in his voice. "After everything you did?" I sighed, leaning back in my chair. "Apparently, yes." There was a long pause on the other end of the line before Marcus spoke again. "You know, sometimes doors close so bigger ones can open. Have you ever considered striking out on your own?" The question caught me off guard. Starting my own business? It wasn't something I'd seriously entertained before. Sure, I dreamed about it occasionally, the freedom, the creativity, the ability to build something truly mine, but those dreams always felt impossibly far away. Now though, with nothing left to lose, the idea began to take root. What followed was a whirlwind of activity. I spent hours researching, drafting plans, and reaching out to contacts I'd cultivated over the years. Some were skeptical, warning me about the risks involved. Others were cautiously supportive, offering advice or introductions to potential investors. Marcus, true to his word, became one of my earliest champions, helping me navigate the complex world of entrepreneurship. One evening, sitting cross-legged on my living room floor surrounded by stacks of papers and empty coffee cups, I sketched out the first draft of my vision. It wasn't enough to simply replicate what I'd done at the old company. I wanted to create something revolutionary, something that would redefine the industry entirely. Slowly but surely, the pieces began to fall into place. Word spread quickly among former colleagues and industry insiders about my sudden departure and subsequent ventures. Many expressed surprise, some offered condolences, and a handful extended tentative offers of collaboration. Among them was Elena, a brilliant data analyst I'd worked closely with during the contract negotiations. She'd always shared my passion for innovation and efficiency, and when she heard about my plans, she jumped at the chance to join forces. Together, we assembled a small but talented team, each member bringing unique skills and perspectives to the table. There were late-night brainstorming sessions, heated debates over strategy, and moments of pure exhilaration when things clicked into place. For the first time in years, I felt alive, not just professionally, but personally too. But challenges loomed large. Funding remained a constant concern, and securing initial investments proved harder than anticipated. Investors were intrigued by the concept but wary of backing an untested startup led by someone fresh out of a corporate scandal. Each rejection stung, but instead of discouragement, it fueled my determination further. Then came the breakthrough. A tech conference in San Francisco provided the perfect platform to showcase our prototype. Standing on stage under bright lights, addressing a packed auditorium of industry leaders and innovators, I felt a surge of adrenaline unlike anything I'd experienced before. As I outlined our mission, demonstrated the product's capabilities, and shared stories of real-world impact, the energy in the room shifted palpably. By the time I finished speaking, applause erupted around me, echoing off the walls. People lined up afterward to ask questions, exchange business cards, and express interest in partnerships. Among them was a representative from a major multinational corporation, one of the very companies I'd pitched unsuccessfully to for funding. This time, however, their interest wasn't casual curiosity. It was genuine enthusiasm. Back at the hotel that night, Elena and I celebrated quietly, savoring the moment while acknowledging how much work still lay ahead. We weren't naive enough to believe this single triumph guaranteed long-term success. But it was validation, a clear sign that we were onto something special. As weeks turned into months, momentum continued to build. Deals materialized faster than expected, partnerships formed organically, and media coverage amplified our reach exponentially. With each milestone achieved, memories of the firing faded slightly, replaced by a growing sense of accomplishment and purpose. Yet amidst all the excitement, shadows lingered. Rumors swirled within the industry about internal strife at my former employer, following the loss of their star negotiator. Projects stalled, clients grew restless, and morale plummeted. Meanwhile, whispers of sabotage began to surface, hints of ulterior motives behind my dismissal that painted a darker picture than I'd initially suspected. Though tempted to delve deeper into these allegations, I resisted. Dwelling on the past wouldn't change anything. Besides, focusing on revenge would only distract from the future we were building. Still, the thought nagged at me occasionally, a reminder that not everything is as straightforward as it seems. And so, life moved forward. New challenges arose, new victories were celebrated, and new lessons learned along the way. Through it all, one truth remained constant: being fired wasn't the end of my story. In many ways, it was only the beginning. The momentum we built in those early months was exhilarating, but it wasn't without its hurdles. Success has a way of attracting attention, not all of it positive. As our startup gained traction, whispers of discontent began to ripple through the industry. Competitors started circling like sharks, eager to exploit any perceived weakness. And then there were the naysayers, those who doubted whether someone with my background could truly disrupt an entrenched system. One afternoon, while reviewing client feedback in our modest co-working space, I received an email that sent chills down my spine. The subject line read, "You should know what they're planning." My stomach tightened as I opened it. Inside was a cryptic message from an anonymous sender, accompanied by a series of documents attached as PDFs. The documents revealed internal communications from my former company, emails and memos discussing strategies to undermine my new venture. It seemed they hadn't just fired me, they'd been actively working behind the scenes to sabotage my efforts ever since. One memo outlined plans to poach key members of my team, another detailed attempts to discredit me with mutual clients, and a third hinted at legal action based on fabricated claims of intellectual property theft. For a moment, I sat frozen, staring at the screen. Anger bubbled up inside me, hot and unrelenting. How dare they? After everything they'd already taken from me, now they wanted to tear down what little I'd managed to rebuild? But beneath the anger lay something else, a flicker of fear. Could we withstand this kind of assault? Were we strong enough to fight back? Elena found me still sitting there hours later, her expression softening when she saw the storm brewing in my eyes. Without saying a word, she pulled up a chair beside me and scrolled through the documents. When she finished, she let out a low whistle. "This is serious," she said finally, leaning back in her seat. "But you know what? This doesn't change anything." I looked at her sharply. "How can you say that? They're trying to destroy us." She met my gaze steadily. "Because if anything, this makes us stronger. Look at what we've already accomplished against impossible odds. Do you really think some corporate bullying is going to stop us now?" Her words struck a chord deep within me. She was right. Every challenge we'd faced so far had only pushed us to grow, adapt, and innovate. If anything, this latest development was proof that we were onto something big, something worth fighting for. We decided not to confront my former employer directly. Instead, we focused on fortifying our position. We reached out to trusted allies in the industry, sharing the evidence anonymously to ensure transparency. Some were skeptical, others outraged, but most agreed that such underhanded tactics couldn't go unchecked. Word spread quickly, and soon enough, public opinion began to shift. Clients who had once wavered in their commitment to work with us doubled down, citing ethical concerns about doing business with a company engaged in such behavior. Meanwhile, we poured every ounce of energy into refining our product and expanding our reach. Late nights turned into early mornings as we worked tirelessly to stay ahead of the curve. Innovation became our shield, creativity our weapon. With each passing day, the gap between us and our detractors widened. But even as we gained ground, the personal toll weighed heavily on me. Sleepless nights gave way to vivid dreams, half memories, half nightmares, of boardroom betrayals and whispered conspiracies. There were moments when doubt crept in, nagging voices reminding me of how much I'd sacrificed, how precarious this whole endeavor remained. Yet every time those doubts surfaced, I reminded myself why I'd started this journey in the first place. It wasn't just about proving them wrong. It was about creating something meaningful, something that would endure long after petty rivalries faded into obscurity. It was about empowering others to believe in themselves, to see that setbacks could be transformed into stepping stones if approached with courage and resilience. And then came the day when everything changed again. A courier arrived at our office with a thick envelope bearing the logo of one of the largest tech conglomerates in the world. Inside was an invitation to present our solution at their annual Innovation Summit. Not just present, but keynote. The event attracted thousands of attendees, including top executives, investors, and media personalities. Being chosen as the keynote speaker was akin to being handed the keys to the kingdom. As I held the invitation in trembling hands, I felt a surge of conflicting emotions. Pride warred with apprehension. Excitement mingled with fear. This was it, the moment where all our hard work would either pay off spectacularly or crumble under the weight of expectation. Either way, there was no turning back. Preparation consumed every waking hour leading up to the summit. We rehearsed relentlessly, tweaking slides, refining talking points, and anticipating potential questions. Elena acted as both coach and cheerleader, pushing me to dig deeper, to find the core of what made our story resonate. By the time we boarded the flight to San Francisco, I felt ready, or as ready as anyone could be stepping onto such a massive stage. The conference center buzzed with anticipation as I took my place backstage, waiting for my cue. Through the curtain, I could see rows upon rows of expectant faces, cameras flashing, murmurs of excitement rippling through the crowd. My heart pounded in my chest, but instead of letting nerves overwhelm me, I focused on the faces of everyone who had believed in me along the way, the colleagues who had stood by my side despite risk, the mentors who had guided me through uncertainty, the friends and family who had cheered me on when I faltered. When the lights hit me and I stepped onto the stage, something remarkable happened. All the fear, all the doubt, melted away. In their place was clarity, a profound understanding of exactly who I was and why I was here. I spoke not just as a founder or an entrepreneur, but as someone who had stared adversity in the face and refused to back down. By the time I concluded my presentation, the audience erupted into applause, a tidal wave of sound that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. People rushed forward to congratulate me, shaking my hand, asking questions, offering support. Among them was a familiar figure, Marcus Langley, smiling broadly as he approached. "You did it," he said simply, his voice warm with pride. "Now watch the world take notice." He wasn't wrong. In the days following the summit, interest in our company skyrocketed. Major publications ran feature stories, investors clamored for meetings, and partnership offers poured in from across the globe. Overnight, we went from scrappy underdogs to industry darlings. Yet amidst the whirlwind of success, I couldn't shake the feeling that this chapter of my life was far from over. Somewhere out there, my former employer continued to plot, convinced they still held the upper hand. And though I knew better than to underestimate them, I also knew one thing for certain. They had no idea what was coming next. The months that followed the summit were a blur of activity, growth, and transformation. Our startup evolved from a fledgling idea into a powerhouse disrupting industries far beyond what we'd initially imagined. Clients who had once hesitated to sign on now clamored for our services, eager to be part of something groundbreaking. Investors lined up to fund our expansion, recognizing not just the value of our product but the resilience and vision behind it. Yet, as exhilarating as this newfound success was, shadows still lingered at the edges of my mind. The documents I'd received, the evidence of sabotage, remained tucked away in a secure folder, untouched since that fateful day. While Elena and Marcus urged me to expose the truth publicly, I resisted. Revenge wasn't my goal, building something lasting was. But deep down, I knew ignoring their actions entirely would leave an unresolved wound, one that might fester if left unchecked. One evening, after another long day of meetings, I found myself sitting alone in my office, staring out at the city skyline. The lights twinkled like stars scattered across the horizon, each one representing dreams and ambitions burning brightly against the darkness. It struck me then, I'd spent so much time running toward the future that I hadn't fully processed the past. My former employer's betrayal still loomed over me, not because they'd hurt me, but because they'd underestimated me, and I wanted them to know it. The next morning, I called a meeting with Elena and Marcus. Together we devised a plan, not one rooted in vengeance, but in accountability. Instead of retaliating directly, we decided to use the very tools they feared most, transparency and innovation. We released a detailed report outlining the unethical practices plaguing the industry, including anonymized excerpts from the leaked documents. The report didn't name names, it didn't need to. Those familiar with the situation understood exactly whom it implicated. The fallout was immediate and devastating, for them. Major clients severed ties with my former company, disgusted by their tactics. Shareholders demanded answers, lawsuits piled up, and morale within their ranks plummeted. Meanwhile, our reputation soared. People admired us not just for our technology, but for our integrity. In exposing the rot beneath the surface, we became a beacon of hope, a reminder that ethics and ambition could coexist. As the dust settled, I received an unexpected phone call. It was Mr. Caldwell, his voice strained and desperate. He begged for a meeting, claiming he'd been unaware of the extent of the sabotage campaign orchestrated by others in senior management. Part of me wanted to hang up, to dismiss him outright. But curiosity got the better of me, and I agreed to meet, not out of pity, but to see how far they'd fallen. We met at a quiet cafe downtown, far removed from the corporate towers where our paths had first crossed. Caldwell looked older, haggard, his usual air of confidence replaced by something closer to shame. He apologized profusely, admitting that firing me had been a catastrophic mistake born of fear and insecurity. "You were too good," he admitted bitterly. "Too talented. Too ambitious. We thought cutting you loose would protect us." I listened silently, letting his words hang heavy in the air between us. When he finished, I leaned forward, locking eyes with him. "You're right about one thing," I said evenly. "Firing me was a mistake. But it wasn't yours alone. You let fear dictate your decisions, and that cost you everything. Learn from it, or don't. Either way, my life is no longer tied to yours." Caldwell nodded, defeated, and left without another word. Watching him go, I felt no anger, no triumph, only a profound sense of closure. Whatever power they'd once held over me was gone, dissolved into the ether like smoke. In the weeks that followed, I turned my attention inward, focusing on the people who mattered most, my team. They were the ones who had stood by me through every challenge, whose belief in our mission had carried us through the darkest moments. To thank them, I announced a bold initiative, profit sharing for all employees, ensuring that everyone shared in the rewards of our collective success. Cheers erupted throughout the office, tears streaming down faces as we celebrated not just financial gain but the knowledge that we'd built something truly special together. And then came the final twist, one I never saw coming. One crisp autumn morning, as golden leaves swirled outside my window, I received an offer to acquire our company. The bidder? A consortium led by none other than Marcus Langley. At first, I balked. Selling felt like surrendering control, relinquishing the dream I'd fought so hard to build. But Marcus reassured me, explaining that the acquisition wouldn't mean stepping away, it would mean scaling higher, faster, and farther than we ever could alone. After days of deliberation, I agreed. The deal closed quietly, allowing us to maintain creative autonomy while gaining access to resources that would propel us to new heights. On the day the papers were signed, I gathered my team to share the news. Their cheers echoed through the halls, mingling with laughter and applause. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to breathe deeply, to savor the moment without worrying about what came next. Because here's the truth, endings are rarely tidy. Life doesn't wrap itself up neatly with bows and fanfare. But sometimes, amidst the chaos, we find clarity. Sometimes, we realize that the battles we fight aren't just about winning, they're about becoming. Becoming stronger, wiser, braver. Becoming the person we were always meant to be. As I stood there, surrounded by the people who had made this journey possible, I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't the same woman who had walked out of that boardroom clutching a cardboard box. I was someone else entirely, someone forged in fire, tempered by adversity, and unafraid to face whatever lay ahead. And as for my former employer? Let's just say karma has a way of balancing the scales. Their empire crumbled under the weight of its own corruption, leaving behind little more than a cautionary tale whispered among industry insiders. As for me, I moved forward, head held high, heart full, and spirit unbroken. Sometimes, being fired isn't the end of your story. Sometimes, it's the beginning of something far greater.